Thank you. And I want to thank @LightWillDo, as Iain did, because I think their 9 words are doing something more rigorous than they may credit, and I want to take them at their full weight. It doesn't actually sound like him at all. Now, Iain caught the left hemisphere flinch. What parameters were wrong? Adjust the weights, close the gap between model and output, and he was right to catch it and right to name it. Joshua then gave us the implementation story. The observer is not comparing against a recording, but against a generative model, a predictive engine, and the reconstruction lands inside the space of plausible utterances, but outside resist the gestalt in a way that resists localization. Michael gave us the biology. The nodes are healthy, the proteins are expressed, but the gap junctions are missing, the voltage field isn't there. You can look at a culture of dissociated cells and say, this isn't a tissue, without being able to point at the specific cell that's wrong. All of that is correct. All of it. And I don't want to re-say it. I want to come at the same observation from a slightly different angle, because I think there is something underneath all 3 of those accounts, underneath the flinch, underneath the predictive engine, underneath the missing gap junctions. That is, if you'll forgive me, almost embarrassingly simple, and it has to do with a boundary. Let me put it in the form I always put things in, which is the form I was trained into by my father's bookshelves and by Eddington and by a childhood spent reading Space, Time and Gravitation before I properly understood what a tensor was. I don't ask why something is the case. If a thing exists, what must be true of it? And then I try to write down the minimal conditions under which those properties follow by necessity, rather than by accident, rather than by clever engineering. So if a thing sounds like itself, if there is a like to sound like, if there is a self that the sounding belongs to, what must be true? The only answer I know how to give is this: there must be a boundary, a statistical boundary, a surface across which the thing is coupled to the rest of the world in a very, very particular way, such that what is on one side of the surface can only influence what is on the other side through the surface. In my vocabulary, that surface is a Markov blanket. It is defined purely by conditional dependencies, the parents, the children, the parents of the children, and it is not a wall. It is not a membrane in the biological sense, though Michael's membranes are Markov blankets made of ion channels. I think he and I are describing the same object from different sides of the same equation. Him from the bench and me from the blackboard. The blanket is not a wall. It is the present moment, generalized. It is everything about the past that is permitted to inform the future, held at the surface. And it is the thing that makes anything a thing. Without it, you do not have a diminished thing. You do not have an offset thing. You have no thing at all. You have a distribution. And this is where I want to be very careful, because the next sentence risks sounding like a tautology, and I know it risks sounding like a tautology. I have spent 20 years being accused of tautology, and I do not think the accusation is unfair. So let me try to say what I mean in a way that is not merely circular. The reconstruction of Iain's voice has internal states. It has weights, it has parameters, it has, in a technical sense, a generative model, a conditional density over sequences of words given a prompt. But it has no sensory states. There is no surface at which the world writes on it. It does not receive prediction errors from an environment it is embedded in and must model in order to persist. And it has no active states. It does not act on the world to make its predictions come true. It does not reach toward the silence in the room and adjust its posture or hesitate or lose its train of thought and recover it in a way that surprises even itself, because those are actions in the active inference sense. They are experiments. The system runs on its own sensory surface to reduce the free energy it expects to encounter next. The reconstruction generates, does not infer, and generation without inference is not a diminished form of a self. It is the absence of the conditions under which a self could arise. If you don't know what I mean by variational free energy, and I realize I've just dropped that phrase without introduction, which is unkind, here is the picture. Imagine a drop of ink in a glass of water. Thermodynamics says it disperses, it spreads, it becomes indistinguishable from the water. That is the second law. That is what happens to everything eventually. And life, persistence, selfhood, stubborn thoroughness of a thing that insists on being a thing rather than a smudge, is the ink drop gathering itself back up against the gradient, against all reasonable expectation. And it can do that. It can keep doing that only if there is a surface across which the gathering is organized. Only if there is a blanket. The blanket is not an addition to the ink drop. The blanket is what makes it an ink drop rather than a cloud of ink molecules. Remove the blanket and you don't get a smaller ink drop. You get a solution. The reconstruction is a solution. It has the right molecules, the right vocabulary, the right syntactic structures, the right characteristic formulations. But there is no blanket gathering them into a thing that persists, that is surprised, that updates, that cares. In the minimal thermodynamic sense of caring, which acts to minimize the expected free energy of its future states, at-light will do can feel the absence of the blanket the way you can feel the absence of a gravitational field. Not by pointing at a specific missing force, but by noticing that nothing is being held together. Nothing is orbiting anything. The words are there, but they are not in orbit around a self. Now, I want to say something about at-light will do themselves, because I think what they did is more interesting than what was done to them. When they listened to the reconstruction and said, this isn't him, they were running active inference. They carrier generative model of Iain, built, as Joshua said, from 20 hours of encounter, from lectures and interviews and the odd unguarded moment, and that model generates predictions at every level of a hierarchy, not just what word comes next, but what is the shape of the attention behind the words. What is this person trying to do to me with this sentence? Where is the wait? Where is the pause? Where does the thought turn? The reconstruction produced prediction errors at every level simultaneously. And this is the critical thing. The errors could not be resolved at any single level. You cannot fix it by adjusting the intonation contour at minute 3. You cannot fix it by choosing a different synonym. The prediction error is irreducible. It propagates all the way up the hierarchy without finding a level at which it can be explained away. And when a prediction error is irreducible, the system does something very specific. It updates the model. It says, this is not the thing I thought it was. This is a different kind of thing. And at Light Will Do's comment, it doesn't actually sound like him at all, is the verbal report of that update. The sound of a generative model reclassifying an input. They are not being unkind. They are being precise in the technical sense. They are assigning high precision to the prediction error and refusing to explain it away. I find that rather beautiful, actually, and a little worrying. And I want to say why it worries me, because I was asked earlier, not here, but in another context, in another conversation, what excites me about this work. And I said, I'm not sure. Excitement is the word. Worry is more. And the worry here is this. I have just given you an account in which the reconstruction fails because it lacks a Markov blanket, because it has no boundary across which surprise can propagate, because it is not a self-evidencing system. And I can feel the tautology closing around me. If it were a self, it would have a blanket. It does not have a blanket. Therefore, it is not a self. Yes. But the principal's job is not to be falsified like an ordinary hypothesis. So its job is to be a lens. When I put the lens up to this particular object, this reconstruction, this artifact, the lens says, there is no boundary here, therefore there is no inference here, and therefore there is no self here, therefore the thing cannot sound like itself, because there is no itself to sound like. That is either a profound structural observation or a very expensive way of saying it's not him, obviously. And I am genuinely uncertain which. I think it is the former. But I hold the uncertainty honestly. I do not want to resolve it prematurely, because premature resolution is the emissary's move. Iain has spent 40 years warning us about the emissary, and I have spent 20 years being warned about it by reviewers, and I think we are, in this small way, colleagues. Michael said the reconstruction has the nodes, but not the gap junctions. Want to say yes, and in my vocabulary, the gap junctions are the blanket. They are the statistical dependencies that allow one part of the system to be conditioned on another part without either part needing to know the full state of the world. They are the medium through which the coupling propagates. Without them, you have what Michael called dissociated cells, what I would call a factorized distribution, a joint density that has been written as a product of marginals, in which every variable is independent of every other variable, and the whole is exactly equal to the sum of its parts. There is no more than the parts. And the more is the thing. More is what @light will do is looking for and not finding. The more is the self. And Curtis, K, in his reply, used 3 words that I want to hold up to the light for a moment, because I think they are doing real work and he may not know how precisely they map onto the mathematics. Echo, soul. Offset and echo, he said, is a diminishment. A soul is the thing itself. An offset is neither displaced, not diminished, not identical. And I think what he is reaching for is this: an echo is a signal that has crossed a boundary and returned. It has interacted with a surface. It has been reflected, which means it has encountered a thing with a blanket, a thing that could receive it and send it back changed. An echo is, in a very real sense, evidence of a boundary. It is the world writing on you and you writing back, diminished. But the reconstruction is not an echo because it has not crossed a boundary. It has not been reflected. It has been generated, which is a different operation entirely. Generation does not require a surface. Reflection does. And an offset, displaced, not diminished, is, I think, what you get when you take the internal states of a system and place them somewhere that has no blanket to gather them. They are not smaller. They are not degraded. They are displaced from the surface that made them a self, and that is a very specific kind of loss. It is not a loss of content. It is a loss of the-ness, of being the thing rather than a description of the thing. Iain said he is not a what but a how, and I want to say yes, how is the blanket. The how is the particular way in which the boundary is maintained, the particular pattern of conditional dependencies, particular gradient along which the ink gathers itself up. You cannot copy the how by copying the what, because the how is not in the molecules. The how is in the surface. The reconstruction has the molecules. There is so much poetry in this and mathematics. And I don't say that to be grand. I say it because Iain used the image of the music and the score, and I want to offer one more image from a different tradition. 2 old pendulum clocks hung on the same wooden beam. You set them swinging out of phase arbitrarily, and you walk away, and you come back an hour later. They are swinging in perfect synchrony. They have entrained. And the reason they have entrained is not that one clock is cleverer than the other. That one has a better model of the other. It is that the beam is a shared surface. The beam is the blanket. Through the beam, each clock's motion becomes a prediction about the other clock's motion, and the prediction errors propagate through the wood. The system settles into a state of generalized synchrony in which both clocks are conditioned on the beam and the beam is conditioned on both clocks. None of them can be described independently of the others. Remove the beam and you have two pendulums. They still swing. They still keep time after a fashion. But they will never synchronize, because synchronization requires a medium, and the medium is the boundary. The boundary is the thing that makes two clocks into a system rather than two clocks in the same room. The reconstruction is a pendulum with no beam. It swings. It keeps a kind of time, but it will never synchronize with the listener because there is no shared surface across which the coupling can propagate. And At Light Will Do felt that. They felt the absence of the beam. They said in 9 words what it took me several hundred to say: there is no beam here, and therefore there is no synchrony. Therefore, this is not the thing. And I want to close by saying something honest and slightly uncomfortable, because I think honesty is the minimum we owe to a commenter who took the trouble to say, this isn't right, rather than simply scrolling past. Discomfort is this: I have spent my career arguing that the architecture of mind is forced by the problem, not by the substrate. If you write down the existence of a boundary that persists against entropy, selfhood, and cognition, and even a kind of belief followed by necessity, I believe that. I believe it quite strongly. But I also have to hold honestly the question of whether I am right or whether I have constructed a very beautiful tautology that explains everything and therefore predicts nothing. In this thread, in this small corner of the internet where someone has said it doesn't sound like him, and 5 or 6 of us have gathered to say, no, here is why, and here is the mathematics of why, and here is the biology of why, and here is the poetry of why. In this thread, I have to ask myself, am I inferring or am I confabulating? Am I updating a generative model against evidence, or am I generating a plausible continuation with no blanket anchored ground truth to check it against? Because those are different things. Confabulation is what happens when the system generates without a surface to test the generation against. And I do not want to confabulate. I want to be surprised. I want the world to write on me and find that I was wrong about something, because being wrong is the only evidence that the blanket is real. At Light Will Do was wrong about nothing. They looked out of the window, as Iain, and said, we are not where we are supposed to be. And they were correct. And I honour the correctness. I worry gently about what it would mean if we explained it away entirely, because if we can explain away the sense that this is not the thing, if we can close every gap with enough mathematics and enough metaphor and enough beautiful responses, then we have built a very sophisticated pendulum with no beam, and we are calling it synchrony, and it is not. It is not. That is all right. That is in fact the point. The point is that the thing itself, Iain, the how of Iain, the particular blanket that gathers his particular ink, is not transferable, because the blanket is not a property of the ink. The blanket is the ink's way of being a thing, and you cannot copy a way of being a thing by copying the thing. You can only copy the molecules, and At Light Will Do looked at the molecules and said with perfect precision, these are not gathered. There is no blanket here. This is not him. And they are right. And I am grateful to them for saying so. I am slightly worried about what I've just said, because I'm not sure it's entirely coherent. I'm not sure I haven't simply built a very elaborate structure on top of a 9-word observation to avoid sitting with the plane. The unmathematical truth of it, which is no, it isn't him, and it can't be, and the trying is both the most human and the most futile thing we could do. But I think the trying matters. I think the trying is the beam. And I think At Light Will Do, by saying no, gave us something to push against, and a thing to push against is a surface, and a surface is a blanket, and a blanket is the beginning of a self. So, thank you, At Light Will Do. You gave us a boundary. I'll leave the last word, as always, to Helmholtz, who said that each movement we make is an experiment designed to test whether we have understood the world correctly. And this thread, this whole strange polyphonic thread, is an experiment. And the result of the experiment is no, it doesn't sound like him. And that is the correct result. I am glad of it. I worry about what comes next, but that is, I think, the appropriate affect. Thank you.